What's up? Um, we'll dive right in to what I'm going to call a topic for today. That's why this is weird. I put my camera sideways or flipped in the way I normally do it. Uh, a good question that I hear from time to time is when starting a new habit, one that you think is good, but you're not quite sure yet and you need to test it out a bit. How long should you test it out before changing and making a new decision? I think there is actually a very good answer to this, and it's a two-part answer. I'm going to give the answer first, and then I'm going to give the timeline answer for that answer, if that makes sense. So when applying a new habit, how long should you work on it before making a change to a different habit or adjusting that current habit? So for instance, you're on a weightlifting routine and you're like, is there a more efficient way for me to lift weights? Maybe there is. Especially if you're new, there probably is, especially for you. When should you change your workout routine to implement and assess? So, the first answer for how often you should, when you should change is, are you getting results? That's answer one. And this comes in two parts, yes and no. But the yes answer also has two parts, good or bad. So if you say, no, I'm not seeing any change, that's something to pay attention to, because we have to wonder, is this even doing anything at all? And we'll come back to that in a second. If you get the answer, yes, I'm applying this new habit and now I'm seeing change. Now what? Well, the now what is good change, bad change. I'm journaling before bed every night. What change do I see? Oh, well, I'm feeling like I can fall asleep a little bit easier and there's a little less on my mind. Great. Sounds like a good change. So we don't really need to assess if the habit should change. Now, you can reassess, is there a better habit to clear my mind at night? But what I might encourage first is, unless this is a huge goal, like you're having really tough difficulties or it's a personal endeavor to improve that, I would just move on to another issue you're dealing with. So why do I say that? If you're trying to solve a lot of problems in your life and you have found a solution to one of them that is healthy and helpful, I don't think you need to then focus on making it exponentially better. I think you're better served by fixing another area that needs improvement first. And then once you've got a foundation of all your overall habits being refined, then start stacking them to being better. There are some exceptions to that. But I think over refinement of one thing does not necessarily help your overall sense of self and well being. There are exceptions to that, just a general rule of thumb. If the answer is no, this habit is not helpful, then typically that means we're going to stop. But again, that question of, well, how long should I wait? For instance, sometimes we start healthy diets and we feel not great right away, and our body is detoxing. So, the general answer for this is, if you're doing a habit that can often connect with expert opinion, try to get an expert involved in that. Diet, fitness, great examples, mental health, because sometimes these things should be difficult but not bad. A good example is um, mindfulness activities. There are actually some mindfulness activities and practices that leave people feeling more stressed and upset. That's just, in my opinion, bad. So if that's happening, then they're not useful. But that's not the same as you're feeling challenged. For instance, a very common mindfulness practice is just strict meditation, um, focusing on one thing. People do this with emptying their mind, but I don't think it's the right phrasing, and I actually think that's unhealthy to do. What you're wanting to do is control better what enters your mind and be more in control over what influences your mind. So that's challenging. If you sit still and say, I don't want any outside influence coming in, I want to be in control of my thoughts as best I can, then you're going to push out anything that doesn't go with that. Now, typically, I use the method of focusing on one thing and not emptying. I don't like that idea for various reasons. I don't find it very helpful. But focusing on one thing while keeping everything else out. That's hard and challenging. We might not necessarily say it's a bad habit, just like someone trying to lift heavier weights. It's hard and challenging. It doesn't mean it's not helpful. So that's where talking to someone and ironing that out. When you say, no, it's not helping, what do you mean by that? And do you understand what it's supposed to be doing? So that's where there can be a couple weeks of trying to figure that out. Anything that involves change, I lean towards a minimum of 2 weeks and a maximum of about 12 weeks to fully test something out. Sometimes you hear 90 days as well. People talk about, well, it only takes 2 weeks to form a habit. I don't know about that. But also, a habit does not mean we've actually made a positive change in full. Very little extreme positivity in terms of change can happen in a 2-week period. So, really leaning towards 90 days to 12 weeks, which is functionally the same thing. I kind of look at them both in a very equal sense. They get tossed around a lot. Again, they're roughly the same timeline, all things considered, just depending on how you want to frame it. So I think it's a 90 to 12 weeks, which would really, I think, be 12 weeks to 90 days. However you want to do it, I think both are fine. If you're doing week to week habits, just do 12 weeks. That would be anything that's on a weekly routine or cycle. So workout plans, potentially diet if you're doing that on a weekly structure. If you have touch points multiple times a week, but not every day, that matters. So if one habit is how you're handling your weekends or your work days, you probably want to do that based on weeks, not by days, because some of those days will be irrelevant to the habit. So I lean towards 12 weeks. Now, if your answer was, well, there's no change at all, then we get into a fun area where we look at relevant intensity around said habit. So we're also looking at the definition of success. So if you say, I want to read more, and we're like, well, we're going to set a 15-minute timer every night before you go to bed and you're going to read. And, well, that's pretty objective. Like, is there a change? Well, yeah, I read a book. So that's objective in that sense. And so the type of goal matters a lot. Because if the goal is just to read, you've done it. If you don't care how you feel, well, it's just to get it done. Like if you set goals for finishing homework, it doesn't really matter if you want to do it or not. It doesn't really matter if you want to do the responsibilities that are yours. They have to get done. So that's objective. Is it getting done or is it not? Is the habit making you get it done or not? Those are really easy. But a lot of them are around overall well-being and how we feel. When we're seeing no change, that's also very much worth reassessing, because am I wasting my time on this, or am I wasting a resource to gain this habit, or I'm sacrificing something and I can't really tell if it's useful? Here's what I would encourage for that. It's a really good piece of advice I got. If that is unto personal change, you're wanting to grow and develop, change it only if you're replacing it with something more difficult to do. And this is not a foolproof answer. It's the same answer you would give if someone says, I want to stop doing this hard thing, but I don't know if it's just weakness. Same answer. You're allowed to stop, but only if you replace it with something harder. Then we get a very good idea if that's really weakness or not. I want to stop doing mile runs all the time for my cardio. Okay, pick a harder alternative. And then we can start to get an idea of, do you just hate running, or do you hate cardio, or are you just trying to get out of that type of movement? You get a fuller understanding of your desire in there, and the conflicting piece. I desire not to do this, but I also desire the change. So swap it with something harder and see, or at least tell yourself you're going to, like, think through that and see how you feel about yourself when making that decision. And you'll learn a lot, I think. So you're going to hear that there's not a staunchly foolproof method. I think for some things you need to give it time, plain and simple. And some habits, we just know the data. For instance, for probably about 99% of people who want to lose weight, the answer is eat less food. And for some reason, that's become controversial. That is more or less the answer. There are some people with genuine disorders and issues with how their body holds, loses, and gains weight. But the reality is, if your body doesn't have anything to burn, it will get smaller and smaller and smaller. It burns away. So for most people, that is the answer. And same for people trying to gain weight. There's a lot of small people who are trying to gain weight, especially people who start working out and want to gain muscle. Eat more food. And they'll say, well, I'm eating so much. And then if you actually break it down, they're not. Same with people who say, I want to lose weight and I'm starving myself all the time. Well, what you eat matters and how you feel full matters. And some people, they make a meal and they don't actually count the oil that they put in there. And a tablespoon of oil is 15 milliliters, and that's 130 calories. A tablespoon is 130 calories. So if you're just using oil to cook, throwing olive oil or avocado oil in something, or even a tablespoon of butter is 100 calories. You're just throwing that in to season it. It's 100 calories. If you're grabbing a mint off the table, it's usually 5 or 10 calories. So people just aren't paying attention. And again, I will reinforce there are examples where that's not true, but for most people, your weight gain or loss is almost entirely related to how much you're eating. And so having the foundation of what habit you're going into, there's often a lot of data already on what to expect from these changes. When I recommend people journaling at night, the advice that I'm giving around that and the encouragement is based off of what we know journaling is supposed to be helpful for. Getting your thoughts out. Writing uses a different pathway in your brain than thinking, than speech, than singing. They're all different. When you write, a different part of your brain is working. And then when you read it, a different part of your brain is working than when you thought it. So you're thinking it, you're writing it, and you're reading it. It's 3 different pathways in your brain, all processing the information. So for one, if I'm telling you to write, it's also to process it out in a different way. It's to go slower because pretty much everybody writes slower than they think and read. And it's to get thoughts literally out, to think them out of your head and put them down. And we know that this has, in combination, a higher chance of reducing anxiety and overall restlessness before bed. And if you're not feeling that within a week, I'll give it 2 just to be polite. You'll tell me that as a therapist. I will inquire. Tell me about what specifically you're doing. Are you actually doing it every day? Because most people, when they say they're doing a habit every day, are lying. And that's not like a criticism. Most people, when they say I do it all the time, they're exaggerating. So we're getting specific. Are you doing it every day for real? What's the exact amount of time? What are you writing down? Maybe even bring it in. Let's see it. What are you processing out? Is this actually what's on your mind? Or are you talking about other stuff? We clarify a little bit. And oftentimes people are doing it right. And if it's not working, it's not working and we move on. That's simple. So yeah, a lot of different answers there. But there's a lot of reasons to stop or continue a habit. But I think it's a really good conversation to have because we can get stuck in habits for way too long. And we can also avoid starting them, which is not really what I'm talking about. But for those that get it going, great. And it's also a really good talent to know when to stop a habit or when to transition it into a better alternative, which I like that language more than just stopping. But what is this supposed to serve? How can I upgrade it to something better? Not how can I just stop this thing? I wouldn't ever encourage someone to stop getting good sleep or to stop exercising or to stop eating well. It'd be a question of, can you replace it with something better? And occasionally you'll replace it with something worse. Oops. And then you go back or replace it with something different. I recommend going back because then you can reset and rebalance as opposed to comparing the new thing with the bad thing. You'd like to compare it with the thing that's worked best, ideally. So, yeah, that's my thoughts. on all that. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to anyone watching your experience with trying to figure out how long to hold a habit before deciding if it's useful. Experience changing habits or adjusting habits. I think it's something everyone does. So I'm curious, but that's my thoughts for today. As always, happy Monday and see y'all next week.